On the night two rival mafia families were supposed to destroy each other, the most feared boss in Chicago ended the war with a decision no one in the room expected. He married the daughter of his enemy. The city of Chicago had seen violence before. Organized crime had always existed beneath the surface of its glittering skyline, quietly shaping the movement of money, power, and influence. But the conflict between the Bennett family and the Romanoff organization had pushed that hidden war closer to the surface than ever before. For nearly 6 years, the two criminal empires had fought for control over Chicago's most valuable underground industries. Shipping routes along Lake Michigan, private security contracts tied to corporate interests, and financial operations connected to offshore accounts had all become battlegrounds. Dozens of men had died, businesses had collapsed, and every attempt to negotiate peace had failed. The Bennett family had once been one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the Midwest. Under the leadership of Clara Bennett's father, the family had controlled several lucrative operations tied to transportation and financial services across Illinois and neighboring states. But power never lasted forever in the criminal world. When Robert Bennett died suddenly 5 years earlier, the family structure began to weaken. His successors struggled to maintain control over the empire he had built. Rival groups quickly noticed the shift in power. Among them, none rose faster than the Romanoff organization, led by Damian Romanoff. The group expanded rapidly across Chicago's criminal economy. Where other crime bosses relied on brute force, Damian built his reputation on something far more dangerous. Strategy. He studied his enemies. He anticipated their decisions. And when he finally acted, it was always at the exact moment that guaranteed victory. By the time the Bennett family realized how powerful the Romanoff Empire had become, it was already too late to stop him. The war between the two families began shortly after. At first, it looked like a typical criminal conflict. Small retaliations, territorial disputes, and quiet attempts to sabotage each other's operations. But the violence escalated quickly. Several Bennett warehouses were destroyed in coordinated attacks. Romanoff financial accounts connected to international investors were hacked and drained. The conflict spread across the city's underground networks like a wildfire. Within months, the war had reached a point where both organizations were losing more than they were gaining. That was when the meeting was arranged. The negotiation took place inside a private conference hall located on the upper floor of an abandoned hotel near Chicago's riverfront. The building had been closed to the public for years, making it the perfect location for a gathering neither family wanted outsiders to witness. Armed security teams from both organizations surrounded the building. Inside the dimly lit conference room, leaders from each side sat across a long table facing one another. The tension was suffocating. Clara Bennett stood near the back of the room, beside her older brother, Michael Bennett. At 26 years old, Clara had grown up surrounded by the dangerous world her family controlled. But until recently, she had managed to remain outside the violent operations that kept the Bennett empire alive. Her father had always protected her from the darker side of the business. After his death, that protection disappeared. Now she found herself standing in the center of a war she had never chosen to be part of. The room grew quieter as the final member of the Romanoff delegation entered, Damian Romanoff. Even among hardened criminals, his presence carried unusual weight. Tall, calm, and sharply dressed in a dark tailored suit, Damian looked more like a corporate executive than the most feared crime boss in Chicago. But the quiet respect shown by the men surrounding him revealed the truth. Every person in the room understood that Damian Romanoff controlled the strongest organization in the city. He walked slowly toward the opposite side of the table and took his seat without speaking. For several seconds, no one said a word. Then Michael Bennett finally broke the silence. He explained that both families had already lost too much in the conflict. Continuing the war would only weaken both sides while allowing outside groups to move into Chicago and take control of the industries they had fought over. Peace was the only logical outcome. Several members of the Romanoff delegation exchanged quiet glances. They knew something Michael Bennett did not. Damian Romanoff had not agreed to this meeting to negotiate. He had already decided how the war would end. When Damian finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady. The violence between the two families would stop immediately. The Bennett organization would retain control over several transportation routes they had originally owned. The Romanov Empire would maintain its authority over the city's financial operations. At first, the proposal sounded almost reasonable. But Damien had not finished. There would be one condition. The alliance between the two empires needed to be permanent, not temporary. And the only way to ensure that kind of loyalty was through family. Clara felt a sudden wave of unease as Damien's gaze slowly moved across the room. It stopped on her. For a moment, the entire room seemed to freeze. Then Damien Romanov delivered the final part of his proposal. The war between the Bennett family and the Romanov Empire would end with a marriage. Clara Bennett would become Damien Romanov's wife. The words echoed across the conference hall like a gunshot. Several members of the Bennett delegation stood up immediately, furious at the suggestion. Michael Bennett slammed his hand against the table, demanding to know if Damien believed he could simply claim their sister like property. But Damien remained completely calm. He explained the situation with unsettling logic. A marriage would bind the two families together. Blood ties would guarantee peace. No Bennett leader would risk harming the Romanov Empire if their own sister stood beside its boss. And no Romanov soldier would attack the Bennett family, while Clara Bennett carried the Romanov name. It was brutal, it was calculated, and it was effective because everyone in the room understood one simple truth. If the war continued, both families would eventually collapse. Clara felt the weight of every eye in the room turning toward her. For the first time since the meeting began, she realized the full meaning of Damien's plan. She had not been brought to the negotiation as an observer. She had been brought as leverage. The silence that followed Damien's proposal stretched painfully long. Finally, Michael Bennett spoke again. His voice carried the exhaustion of a man who had run out of options. The Bennett family would accept the terms. Clara felt her chest tighten. The decision had been made without her. Her future had been traded for peace. Damien Romanov stood from his chair. His gaze remained fixed on Clara as he spoke the final words that sealed the agreement between the two criminal empires. The war between the Bennett family and the Romanov organization was officially over because Clara Bennett would become his wife that very night. Men like Damien Romanov never proposed peace unless they already controlled the outcome. The moment his decision echoed to the abandoned conference hall, the fragile silence that had filled the room shattered into chaos. Members of both criminal families erupted in angry voices. Bennett's soldiers argued fiercely with Romanov representatives, accusing them of manipulating the negotiations. Several men reached instinctively toward concealed weapons before their leaders quickly signaled them to stand down. The room had transformed from a negotiation chamber into a storm of tension and disbelief. But at the center of that storm, Damien Romanov remained completely calm. He stood beside the long conference table, watching the reaction unfold as if he had expected every word and every movement. Because in truth he had. Damien Romanov had never been known for making impulsive decisions. Every move he made inside the criminal world had been carefully planned long before anyone else realized what he was doing. That reputation was the reason the Romanov Empire had risen so quickly, and it was the reason the Bennett family now faced a choice they could not refuse. Across the city of Chicago, Damien Romanov's name carried an unusual mixture of fear and respect. Unlike many crime bosses who built their empires through reckless violence, Damien had earned his position through patience and strategy. He had been born into a smaller criminal family, with roots stretching back to Eastern Europe. When he arrived in the United States as a young man, his organization controlled little more than a handful of smuggling operations tied to international shipping routes. Most criminal groups ignored him. That had been their first mistake. Instead of challenging powerful organizations directly, Damien focused on building quiet influence inside industries others overlooked. He invested heavily in financial networks connected to international trade, allowing his organization to move money across borders without attracting attention. He built alliances with private security companies that quietly controlled several high-value transportation routes. And when his rivals finally noticed how much power he had accumulated, he was already too strong to challenge. One by one, smaller criminal groups across Chicago either joined the Romanov organization or disappeared. Within a few years, Damian Romanoff had become one of the most powerful figures in the city's underground world. But what made him truly dangerous was not his wealth or his soldiers. It was his ability to think several moves ahead of everyone else. That was exactly what the Bennett family was realizing now. Michael Bennett sat at the negotiation table staring at Damian with visible frustration. His hands were clenched tightly against the polished wood surface as he tried to calculate the consequences of the proposal. Rejecting the marriage would mean continuing the war, and the Bennett family had already lost too many resources to survive another year of open conflict. Accepting the deal meant something equally painful. It meant sacrificing his own sister. Clara stood near the far wall of the room, her heart pounding as she watched the conversation unfold around her. The decision had been made quickly, almost coldly. Her future had been reduced to a strategic solution. She had always understood that her family's world operated on power and loyalty. But until that moment, she had never imagined she would become the currency used to secure peace. The weight of the situation pressed heavily against her chest. Across the room, Damian Romanoff finally turned his attention toward her. For the first time since the negotiations began, Clara felt the full intensity of his gaze. It was not cruel, it was not mocking, but it carried an unsettling certainty that made her uneasy. Damian Romanoff looked like a man who had already anticipated how this night would end. The shouting inside the conference hall gradually began to fade as both sides realized something important. There was no better solution. The Bennett family could not defeat the Romanov Empire in open war, and Damian Romanoff had just offered them the only path to survival. The marriage would bind the two families together. It would transform enemies into reluctant allies. Most importantly, it would end the violence that had been tearing their empires apart. After several long minutes of heated discussion, Michael Bennett finally pushed his chair back from the table and stood. The room grew quiet again. His expression carried the painful acceptance of a man forced to make a decision he hated. The Bennett family would accept the marriage. The war would end. Clara felt the words land like a physical blow. She said nothing, because she knew there was nothing she could say that would change the outcome. Damian Romanoff gave a single nod of acknowledgement. For him, the matter was already settled. The preparations for the ceremony began immediately. Neither family wanted to risk delaying the agreement. Too many rival groups across Chicago had already noticed the weakness created by the war between the two empires. If news of the marriage spread quickly enough, it would signal that the conflict had ended. That was exactly what Damian intended. By midnight, the abandoned hotel had been transformed into a heavily guarded wedding site. Security teams from both families surrounded the building, preventing anyone from approaching the area without clearance. Inside the conference hall, the long negotiation table had been removed to create space for a small ceremonial arrangement. There were no decorations, no music, no celebration. This was not a wedding built on love or joy. It was a contract written in blood. Clara stood near the center of the room, wearing a simple white dress that had been brought by members of the Bennett family. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the floor. Across from her, Damian Romanoff waited calmly beside the officiant who had been called to oversee the ceremony. Even in the dim lighting of the conference hall, his presence dominated the room. He looked composed, almost indifferent to the emotional tension surrounding the moment. But every soldier standing along the walls understood the significance of what was happening. This marriage would reshape the balance of power across Chicago's criminal world. The ceremony itself lasted only a few minutes. The officiant recited the legal vows required to finalize the union. Clara responded quietly when asked for her confirmation. Damian's voice remained steady when he spoke as part of the ceremony. And just like that, the war between the Bennett family and the Romanov Empire officially ended. The room remained silent as the ceremony concluded. No one applauded. No one celebrated. Because everyone present understood that the marriage had not been built on happiness. It had been built on necessity. As the last witness signatures were placed on the marriage documents, Damian turned slightly toward Clara. For a brief moment, the two of them stood alone in the center of the room, while the others stepped back. Clara expected him to say something cold or distant. Instead, his voice lowered to a quiet tone meant only for her to hear. What he said next made her heart skip. He had not married her simply to end the war. He married her because someone else wanted her dead. Clara Bennett expected to become a hostage inside the Romanov Empire. Instead, she became its most protected secret. The words Damien had spoken after the wedding echoed in her mind the entire night. He had not married her to end the war. He had married her because someone else wanted her dead. Those words transformed everything Clara believed about the situation. What she had thought was a cold political arrangement between rival crime families suddenly felt like something far more complicated and far more dangerous. Less than an hour after the ceremony ended, a convoy of black vehicles left the abandoned hotel and began moving north through the quiet streets of Chicago. Inside the first car, Clara sat silently beside Damien Romanoff. The city lights reflected across the window as the vehicle passed through downtown streets before gradually leaving the crowded skyline behind. The buildings grew smaller, the roads darker, and the traffic thinner as they moved toward the outer edges of the city. Neither of them spoke. Clara felt the weight of uncertainty pressing heavily against her chest. Her entire life had changed in a single night, yet she still did not understand why Damien had chosen her. She finally turned her gaze toward him. Damien Romanoff looked exactly the same as he had during the negotiation meeting earlier that evening. Calm, composed, and completely unreadable. His attention remained focused on the road ahead, as if he were already thinking several steps beyond the moment they were living in. Clara wondered how someone could remain so controlled after orchestrating something as dramatic as ending a criminal war through marriage. The convoy eventually turned onto a long private road surrounded by dense forest. The Romanoff estate appeared several minutes later. Clara immediately understood why people described it as a fortress. The property stretched across dozens of acres, hidden behind tall iron gates and reinforced security walls. Surveillance towers stood along the perimeter, each equipped with powerful floodlights and advanced monitoring equipment. Armed guards patrolled the entrance checkpoint. Every vehicle entering the estate was inspected carefully before being allowed to pass through the gates. As the convoy moved deeper inside the property, Clara saw the mansion itself rising beyond the trees. The structure looked less like a home and more like the headquarters of a powerful private organization. Large stone walls surrounded the main building, and several smaller structures nearby appeared to house security teams and operational offices. For a moment, Clara forgot the fear inside her mind. The scale of Damien's empire was impossible to ignore. She had always known the Romanoff organization was powerful. Now she was seeing the reality of that power. The convoy stopped near the entrance of the main mansion. As Clara stepped out of the vehicle, the cool night air brushed across her face. Several members of Damien's organization were already waiting outside. One of them stepped forward immediately. Victor Kane. Clara recognized his name from the negotiation meeting earlier that evening. Within the Romanoff organization, Victor served as Damien's chief strategist and closest advisor. Unlike many of the soldiers standing around this estate, Victor carried himself with a calm professionalism rather than open aggression. His sharp eyes studied Clara carefully as Damien approached. There was no hostility in Victor's expression, but there was unmistakable curiosity. Victor greeted Damien briefly before turning his attention toward Clara. He offered a respectful nod, acknowledging her new position inside the Romanov Empire. But Clara noticed something unusual. None of the soldiers watching from nearby looked at her with resentment or suspicion. Instead, their expressions carried something closer to caution, almost as if they had been instructed to treat her with unusual care. Damien gave several quiet instructions to security teams before leading Clara inside the mansion. The interior of the estate was just as impressive as the exterior. Large marble floors stretched across a grand entrance hall illuminated by soft golden lighting. Several hallways extended deeper into the building, each leading toward different wings of the estate. Clara could already sense that this place was more than a residence. It was the operational center of the Romanov Empire. As they moved through the hallways, Damien briefly explained the structure of his organization. The Romanov Empire did not operate like a traditional criminal family. It functioned more like an international business network. Financial operations managed money transfers between private investors across several countries. Shipping divisions controlled transportation routes connecting ports throughout North America and Europe. Security teams protected those operations from both law enforcement investigations and rival criminal organizations. Every part of the empire was carefully structured, efficient, disciplined, and extremely powerful. Clara listened quietly as Damien described the world she had now married into. Part of her expected him to treat her like a prisoner, but he did not. Instead, he spoke to her as if she were someone whose understanding of the situation actually mattered. When they reached the upper floor of the mansion, Damien stopped outside a large bedroom at the end of a quiet hallway. This would be her room. The space inside was spacious and comfortable, overlooking the forest surrounding the estate. It looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a place where someone was being held against their will. Clara stepped inside slowly. She turned back toward Damien with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "Why are you protecting me?" she finally asked. Damien studied her for a moment before answering. "Because right now," he said quietly, "you are the most valuable person inside this empire." The statement sent a ripple of unease through Clara's mind. Valuable. The words sounded less comforting than he probably intended. Over the next several days, Clara began adjusting to life inside the Romanov estate. She quickly realized that Damien's organization operated with remarkable precision. Every member of the empire knew their responsibilities. Security teams maintained strict patrol schedules around the property. Financial analysts worked inside a secure office wing monitoring international transactions connected to Romanov investments. Strategists like Victor Kane coordinated communication between the empire's various divisions. Clara spent most of her time exploring the mansion and observing the way the organization functioned. But one thing became increasingly clear. People were watching her, not in a threatening way, but in a cautious one. Members of Damien's organization treated her with an unusual level of respect. Yet they also seemed careful about discussing certain topics when she was nearby. It felt as if they knew something about her that she did not. Damien himself maintained a similar distance. He checked on her safety regularly, making sure security protocols were being followed carefully. But he rarely explained why the protection was necessary. Days passed. The mystery surrounding her situation only deepened. One evening, Clara left her room to walk through the quiet hallways of the mansion. Most of the estate had grown silent for the night. As she passed near the strategy office located on the lower floor, she heard voices inside the room. Victor Kane was speaking with another member of the organization. Their conversation stopped briefly when footsteps approached the door. Clara paused without making a sound. Victor's voice lowered slightly as he continued speaking. The words that reached her ears made her heart freeze. Damien Romanov had been searching for Clara Bennett for years. Clara Bennett did not sleep that night. The words she had overheard outside the strategy room repeated endlessly in her mind. Damien Romanov had been searching for her for years. It made no sense. Until a few days earlier, Clara had believed Damien barely knew she existed. The war between the Bennett family and the Romanov Empire had always revolved around territory, financial influence, and control over criminal industries. At least, that was what everyone believed. But now something felt wrong. If Damien had been searching for her long before the war reached its most violent stage, then the marriage proposal inside the negotiation hall had not been a sudden decision. It had been planned, carefully. That realization unsettled Clara more than a forced wedding ever had. The next morning, she began looking for answers. The Romanov estate operated like a small city hidden inside the forest. Every wing of the mansion served a specific function: financial offices, strategic planning rooms, communication centers, and private living quarters for trusted members of the organization. At first, Clara had assumed those areas would be completely restricted, but Damien had not placed limits on where she could go. That alone told her something important. He was not afraid of her discovering pieces of the truth. She began exploring the administrative offices located on the second floor of the estate. Most of the rooms contained financial analysts reviewing international shipping records or monitoring digital transactions connected to Romanov investments. Clara moved quietly through the area, careful not to attract unnecessary attention. Several employees glanced up when she entered, but none questioned her presence. They already knew who she was. Damien Romanov's wife, the woman whose marriage had ended one of the bloodiest criminal conflicts Chicago had seen in years. Eventually, Clara found the archive office. The room contained several secure computer terminals connected to encrypted databases used by the Romanov organization to track historical financial activity. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down at one of the workstations. Part of her wondered if Damien expected her to search. If he had truly been looking for her for years, perhaps he wanted her to uncover the truth on her own. The database contained decades of financial records tied to international companies, shipping corporations, and private investment groups. At first, most of the information looked ordinary. Large-scale money transfers, investment agreements, international trade records. But the deeper she searched, the more unusual connections began appearing. Several financial accounts linked to the Bennett family had been flagged inside Romanov intelligence files years before the war between the two organizations had even started. That discovery alone was strange. The Bennett family had always operated primarily within Chicago. Their financial operations were smaller compared to the global reach of the Romanov Empire. Yet someone inside Damien's organization had been monitoring Bennett transactions long before the conflict began. Clara continued digging through the records. Then she found something that made her stomach tighten. Her father's name, Robert Bennett. The files connected to his financial activity were stored inside a separate, encrypted folder labeled with restricted access clearance. Clara opened the documents slowly. The records revealed something she had never known about her father. Years before the Bennett family became involved in the criminal war with the Romanov Empire, Robert Bennett had been working with an international financial network, not a legitimate banking system, something far more secretive. The documents described a hidden financial archive used by powerful individuals across multiple industries, corporate executives, political figures, and criminal organizations. The system functioned like a vault, a place where sensitive financial agreements and secret transactions could be stored safely beyond the reach of government investigations. For people operating in dangerous circles of power, the archive provided protection, but also created opportunity. Anyone who gained access to the full system could control the secrets stored inside it. Clara leaned back slowly in the chair. Her father had never mentioned any of this. To her, Robert Bennett had always been a businessman struggling to maintain control over a declining criminal empire. But these documents revealed something very different. Her father had once been connected to a network that extended far beyond Chicago, a network powerful enough to attract the attention of people like Damien Romanov. The office door opened quietly behind her. Clara turned. Damien stood in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His expression revealed nothing, but Clara sensed he already knew what she had discovered. "You've been looking for answers," Damien said calmly. Clara stood slowly. "You knew about my father," she replied. Damien stepped inside the room. "Yes." He did not attempt to deny it. That honesty made the situation even more unsettling. Clara crossed her arms, forcing herself to stay calm. "You married me because of him," she said. Damien studied her carefully before answering. "Not because of him," he said quietly. "Because of what he left behind." The word sent a chill through Clara. Damien moved toward the computer screen and pointed to one of the encrypted files. Robert Bennett had not simply worked with the hidden archive. He had helped design parts of it. More importantly, he had created a unique access system tied to a specific verification identity. Someone whose authorization would be required to unlock the deeper layers of the financial network. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken. "Who?" she asked. Damien looked directly at her. "You." The answer left her speechless. Her father had connected the archive system to her identity years earlier, not as a participant in the network, but as the person capable of unlocking it. Clara struggled to process the information. If the system truly contained financial secrets belonging to powerful elites, then anyone who learned about her connection to the archive would see her as a key to controlling those secrets, which meant Damien Romanov had not married her to stop a war. He had married her to protect the one person capable of exposing the system, because other people were already searching for her. Clara felt the realization settle slowly in her chest. The conflict between the Bennett family and the Romanov Empire suddenly seemed smaller compared to the danger surrounding the hidden archive. "Who else knows about this?" she asked quietly. Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, He opened another encrypted file inside the database. The document contained a list of financial accounts connected to the archive system. Clara scanned the names. Several belonged to international corporations. Others were tied to political figures whose influence extended far beyond the United States. At the bottom of the document, a single name had been highlighted by Romanov intelligence analysts, someone who had been quietly searching for access to the archive for years. Clara felt her breath catch as she noticed something else. Beneath the list of names was a secondary file, a verification record. The system required a unique identity to unlock its deeper functions. That identity had already been registered inside the archive. Clara Bennett. Her name appeared clearly on the document, connected to a financial system controlled by some of the most powerful people in the world. And if those people ever discovered where she was hiding, the war Damian Romanov had just ended would only be the beginning. The marriage that ended one war had just ignited another. For several days after Clara Bennett discovered the truth about the hidden financial archive, the Romanov estate remained unusually quiet. The massive fortress outside Chicago operated with the same disciplined efficiency Clara had observed since arriving there. Security patrols followed their routes. Financial analysts worked inside the operations wing. Victor Kane continued coordinating international communication channels for Damian's empire. On the surface, everything appeared stable. But beneath that calm, something dangerous had begun to move. The first warning arrived through Romanov intelligence networks operating across Chicago. Victor Kane delivered the report personally inside the estate strategy room. Several rival criminal organizations had started asking questions about Clara Bennett. Not publicly. Quietly, investigators tied to underground financial brokers were suddenly searching for information about the Bennett family's financial history. Private security companies connected to international crime groups had begun watching Romanov shipping routes along the lake. Most concerning of all, two organizations known for operating outside the city had sent representatives into Chicago. They were not looking for territory. They were looking for a person, Clara Bennett. When Victor finished explaining the intelligence report, the tension inside the strategy room became impossible to ignore. Clara sat beside Damian at the long table, studying the digital map projected across the wall. Several blinking indicators showed locations where Romanov surveillance teams had identified suspicious activity. Damian's enemies were moving carefully, but they were definitely moving. Victor folded his arms as he reviewed the situation. Someone is spreading information about the archive, he said quietly. Clara felt a chill move through her chest. If people connected to that hidden financial network had begun searching for her, then the system her father helped create was no longer secret. Damian remained calm, but Clara could see the shift in his posture. He had expected danger, but this was happening faster than even he had anticipated. What organizations are involved? Damian asked. Victor activated another file on the display. The names that appeared were enough to make several Romanov strategists exchange uneasy glances. 2 Eastern European financial syndicates. A private investment group known for laundering money through offshore banking systems. And a criminal brokerage network specializing in blackmail operations against corporate executives. Each group had connections to the same thing. The archive. Clara leaned forward slightly, studying the information. If they believe I can access the system, she said quietly, then they'll do anything to find me. Damian nodded. Yes. There was no point pretending otherwise. The archive her father had helped build contained financial records tied to powerful people across multiple industries. Politicians, corporate leaders, international crime figures. Anyone who gained control of that information would gain extraordinary influence, which meant Clara Bennett had suddenly become one of the most valuable targets in the criminal world. The consequences appeared almost immediately. Within 2 days, violence began spreading across Chicago's underground networks. A private warehouse connected to one of the Eastern European syndicates exploded late one night near the city's industrial harbor. Another criminal group attempted to intercept a Romanov shipping convoy moving through the northern highway routes. Several smaller organizations began fighting each other over control of financial brokers believed to have information about the archive. The city's criminal underworld was spiraling into chaos. and every move seemed connected to the same objective: finding Clara Bennett. Inside the Romanoff estate, Damien responded quickly. Security around the property increased dramatically. Additional surveillance teams were deployed throughout Chicago to monitor rival activity. Several Romanoff financial divisions began quietly transferring assets away from vulnerable locations. But the most important work happened inside the strategy room. Clara became part of it. At first, she hesitated to involve herself in the investigation. She had grown up around the Bennett family's criminal operations, but she had never taken part in strategic planning before. Now the situation demanded it. If her father had designed parts of the archive system, she might understand patterns that others could not. Damien allowed her full access to the financial records his organization had collected. Together, they began analyzing the encrypted documents Robert Bennett had left behind. The process revealed something extraordinary. The hidden archive was far more complex than Clara originally believed. It was not simply a database containing financial secrets. It was a layered financial ecosystem, multiple accounts scattered across international banks, corporate investment structures tied to offshore shell companies, political donations hidden within legitimate charitable foundations, each piece connected to the others through encrypted verification systems. If someone unlocked the full archive, they would gain access to billions of dollars hidden inside the global financial system. But the money itself was not the most valuable part. The real power came from the information attached to those accounts. Proof of illegal financial deals, evidence of corruption, records capable of destroying reputations belonging to some of the most powerful figures in the world. Clara stared at the screen in disbelief. Her father had been involved with something far larger than she ever imagined. "No wonder they're searching for me," she whispered. Damien watched her carefully. Yes, there was no comfort in the truth. The archive was not simply valuable. It was dangerous enough to destabilize entire industries if exposed, which meant anyone seeking control of it would stop at nothing. The investigation continued late into the night. Clara and the Romanoff analysts slowly mapped the financial connections, linking the archive to various organizations across the world. As the picture became clearer, one disturbing realization emerged. The Bennett family had not been the only group connected to the archive. Several powerful investors inside Chicago had also participated in the system years earlier. Some of them were still active inside the city's financial world, which meant the war spreading through Chicago might only be the beginning. Then Victor Kane returned with another intelligence update. This one changed the atmosphere inside the room instantly. Romanoff surveillance teams had intercepted encrypted communication between one of the rival organizations and an unknown contact. The contact had provided them with specific details about Clara Bennett's connection to the archive, information that only a small number of people inside the Romanov Empire knew. Victor looked directly at Damien. "There's a leak," he said. Silence filled the room. The implication was impossible to ignore. Someone inside Damien Romanoff's organization had been secretly helping his enemies, and that betrayal meant the next war would not only be fought outside the Empire, it would be fought from within. The man Clara Bennett had once feared the most had now become the only person capable of keeping her alive. The discovery that someone inside the Romanoff Empire was secretly leaking information changed the atmosphere inside the estate overnight. Security doubled. Armed patrols moved constantly through the forest surrounding the mansion. Surveillance teams monitored every road leading toward the property, and communication channels were encrypted through multiple layers of protection. Damien Romanoff had built his empire through strategy and discipline. Now he was applying that same precision to protecting one person. Clara, for the first time since arriving at this estate, Clara began to realize just how seriously Damien viewed the threat surrounding her. He was not simply guarding her out of obligation as his wife. He was protecting the most valuable key in a global financial war. That understanding changed the way she saw him. During the first days of their forced marriage, Clara had viewed Damien Romanoff as nothing more than a powerful criminal leader who had used her as a political solution. Now she was seeing a different side of him, a man who planned every move carefully, a man who understood dangers long before they became visible, and perhaps most importantly, a man who had risked starting another war simply to keep her out of someone else's hands. The shift between them began slowly. They spent long hours inside the strategy room analyzing the financial records connected to the hidden archive her father had helped create. At first, their conversations were strictly focused on the investigation. Clara pointed out patterns in the encrypted files that Romanoff analysts had overlooked. Her familiarity with her father's business habits allowed her to recognize certain coding structures hidden within the archive system. Damien listened carefully to every observation she made. He never dismissed her ideas, and when she uncovered connections between several international accounts, he immediately adjusted his organization's defensive strategy around that information. The respect he showed for her intelligence surprised her. Most men inside the criminal world dismissed outsiders quickly. Damien Romanoff did not. As the investigation continued, Clara also began to understand the way Damien's mind worked. He did not approach problems emotionally. He approached them like a chess player. Every decision he made considered multiple possible outcomes. Every move inside the empire served a larger strategy that often stretched months or years into the future. Clara slowly realized something important. Damien Romanoff had not simply reacted to the threat surrounding her. He had anticipated it, which meant the moment he interrupted the negotiation meeting and forced a marriage between their families. He had already known the archive would eventually bring enemies searching for her. One evening, while reviewing financial records inside the strategy office, Clara finally asked a question that had been lingering in her mind for days. "How long have you known about the archive?" Damien paused briefly before answering. "Almost 10 years. Clara turned toward him in surprise. 10 years. That meant Damien had been aware of the system long before the war between the Bennett family and the Romanoff Empire began. He explained quietly. Years earlier, his organization had intercepted financial activity tied to several offshore accounts connected to international corporate networks. The patterns in those transactions suggested the existence of a hidden financial archive used to store sensitive information. At first, Damien believed it was simply another private banking system used by wealthy investors. But as he investigated deeper, he realized something far more powerful was hidden behind those accounts. The archive was not just storing money. It was storing secrets. Illegal financial deals, corporate corruption, political bribery, criminal partnerships between individuals who publicly claimed to be rivals. Anyone with access to the system could control those secrets. And control over those secrets meant control over people connected to them. Clara listened carefully. The system was built to protect powerful people, she said quietly. Damien shook his head. "No," he replied. "It was built to control them." The difference was enormous, and someone had been trying to gain full access to that system for years. Clara returned her attention to the computer screen displaying the archive records. The files her father had left behind were not random financial notes. They were clues, encrypted pathways leading toward the deeper sections of the archive, which meant Robert Bennett had not simply worked for the system. He had discovered something inside it, something dangerous enough to make him disappear. Clara felt a growing weight settle in her chest. "My father tried to expose it," she said slowly. Damien did not deny it. Yes, the truth had become clearer with every document they analyzed. Robert Bennett had discovered evidence inside the archive that connected several powerful political figures and international corporations to illegal financial operations. Instead of protecting those secrets, he had tried to reveal them. That decision had sealed his fate. Someone inside the network had silenced him before he could expose the truth. But before disappearing, Robert Bennett had done one final thing. He had hidden the archive's access key inside his daughter's identity. Clara felt the reality of that decision settle heavily in her mind. Her father had turned her into the final safeguard of the system, not because he wanted her to control it, but because he trusted that she would eventually destroy it. The investigation continued late into the night. As Romanoff analysts decrypted more of the archive structure, the scale of the system became even more disturbing. Several of the accounts connected to the network contained billions of dollars hidden inside shell corporations spread across multiple continents. The individuals linked to those accounts included government officials, multinational investors, and private military contractors. If the archive were exposed publicly, entire governments could collapse. Clara finally understood the truth behind the war now spreading across Chicago. The criminal organizations searching for her were not simply chasing money. They were chasing power. And she was the only person capable of unlocking the vault that held it. As midnight approached, Clara continued reviewing the final set of encrypted files her father had left behind. One document caught her attention. Unlike the others, this file contained a personal encryption code connected directly to Robert Bennett's private digital signature. Her heart began to race as she opened it. Inside the file was a message, not a financial record, a letter written by her father years earlier. The message was short, but the words inside it made Clara's breath stop. Robert Bennett had not just hidden the archive key inside her identity. He had left instructions explaining exactly why she was the only person capable of unlocking the system. The war between the Bennett and Romanoff families had never truly been about territory. It had never been about shipping routes, financial influence, or control over Chicago's criminal economy. The truth was far more dangerous. The war had always been about Clara Bennett. When Clara finished reading the encrypted message her father left behind, the final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The letter had been written nearly 6 years earlier, shortly before Robert Bennett disappeared. His words were calm but urgent. He explained that the hidden financial archive had grown far beyond its original purpose. What had once been a secure storage system for private financial agreements had evolved into something darker. The system now protected the secrets of people powerful enough to manipulate governments, global markets, and criminal organizations at the same time. But the archive had one flaw. Its deepest layers required a single identity verification code, a key. Robert Bennett had built that verification system himself, and when he discovered how dangerous the archive had become, he made one final decision. He tied the access code to his daughter's identity, Clara Bennett, not to control the archive, but to destroy it. Robert had planned to expose the entire system, but before he could complete that plan, someone discovered what he was doing. The message ended with a warning. If Clara ever discovered the truth, it meant the people connected to the archive had already begun searching for her. And if that happened, she could trust no one except the man who understood the system better than anyone else. Damien Romanoff. Clara stared at the screen in silence. Her father had known Damien years before the war between their families ever began, which meant the conflict that had torn Chicago apart had likely been orchestrated to reach one objective: finding the key to the archive, finding Clara. Damien stood across the strategy room, watching her expression carefully. He did not ask what the message said, because he already understood. Clara slowly closed the file. "My father knew someone would try to use the archive," she said quietly. Damien nodded. "Yes. He made me the key so no one else would control it." The words hung heavily in the air. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Victor Kane entered the strategy room, carrying another intelligence report. The tension in his posture made it clear the situation had escalated again. Romanoff surveillance teams had traced the internal communication leak inside the organization. The identity of the traitor had finally been confirmed. Victor placed the file on the table. The name inside it made Damien's expression darken immediately. Alexei Markov, one of the Romanov Empire's most trusted financial coordinators. For years, Alexei had managed international money transfers between the organization's global operations. His position gave him access to sensitive financial records connected to dozens of Romanov investments, which meant he had also seen the encrypted files connected to Clara Bennett. Victor explained what their investigation had uncovered. Alexei had secretly been working with outside investors connected to the hidden archive network. When the war between the Bennett family and the Romanov Empire began, Alexei had quietly fueled the conflict by manipulating financial transactions and spreading information between rival groups. The war had not been accidental. It had been engineered. Its purpose was simple: force both criminal families into open conflict until Clara Bennett was eventually drawn into the center of the chaos, where she could be captured. Damien's voice grew colder as he processed the report. Alexei had been working for someone far more powerful, someone who wanted access to the archive but could not reach it directly. The war between the Bennett and Romanov families had been nothing more than a tool used to flush Clara out into the open. Clara felt the realization settle heavily in her chest. Her father had died trying to stop that same plan years earlier. Now the same forces had returned to finish what they started. Victor activated a digital map, showing the latest intelligence reports from across Chicago. The situation outside the estate had grown worse. 3 rival criminal factions were now fighting openly across the city. A Romanov financial warehouse had been attacked by armed mercenaries the previous night. Another organization had attempted to intercept encrypted communication signals connected to the estate. Every group searching for Clara was becoming more desperate, which meant the next attack would be larger, more violent. Damien stood silently for a moment before turning toward Victor. "Prepare the teams," he said. Victor nodded immediately. He understood what Damien was planning. The war could not continue indefinitely. The only way to end it was to confront the people orchestrating it. Clara watched Damien carefully. "You know who's behind this," she said. Damien did not deny it. "Yes." The name connected to Alexei Markov's secret communication network appeared inside several encrypted financial files tied to the archive system. A man whose influence extended across international banking networks. Someone powerful enough to manipulate criminal organizations and corporate investors at the same time. Clara felt a cold realization run through her mind. If the person behind the conspiracy had built the archive system alongside her father years earlier, then he had been waiting for access to it ever since. Waiting for the key to appear. Waiting for Clara Bennett. The Romanov estate prepared for war. Security forces deployed across the property. Communication networks activated across Damien's international operations. Every soldier inside the organization understood what was coming. The final confrontation. Late that night, Victor returned with the final piece of intelligence they had been waiting for. Alexei Markov had arranged a meeting with the man controlling the archive network, a meeting that would take place within 24 hours. Damien studied the information carefully, because the name connected to that meeting confirmed the worst possibility. The mastermind behind the hidden financial archive was finally stepping out of the shadows, and the architect of the entire conspiracy had just revealed himself. Clara Bennett entered the Mafia world as a sacrifice meant to stop a war. Now the fate of an empire and the secrets of some of the most powerful people in the world rested entirely on her decision. The information Victor Kane delivered that night confirmed everything Damien Romanov had suspected. The man orchestrating the conspiracy was finally stepping out of the shadows. His name was Leonard Vance. To the outside world, Leonard Vance was a respected financial strategist whose influence stretched across international investment firms and corporate advisory networks. His public reputation was built on wealth, intelligence, and political connections. But behind that reputation was something far more dangerous. Years earlier, Leonard Vance had been one of the architects of the hidden financial archive Robert Bennett helped create. The system had been designed to protect powerful individuals by storing records of sensitive financial agreements beyond the reach of public scrutiny. But Vance had always seen a different opportunity: control. If someone could gain full access to the archive, they could manipulate the secrets of governments, corporations, and criminal organizations across the world. And for years, Leonard Vance had been searching for the one thing he needed to unlock that power: Clara Bennett. When Damien read the intelligence file confirming Vance's involvement, he immediately understood the scale of the conflict they were facing. The war spreading across Chicago was not just about criminal territory anymore. It was about control over information capable of reshaping global power structures. Vance had been patient. He had manipulated criminal groups into fighting each other while secretly searching for the key to the archive. The war between the Bennett family and the Romanov Empire had simply been one part of his plan, and now the final stage had begun. The confrontation was arranged for the following night. Victor Kane tracked Alexei Markov's encrypted communications to an abandoned financial storage facility near Chicago's old industrial harbor. The location had once been used by international banking networks to move sensitive documents between secure vaults. Now it served as the meeting point where Leonard Vance intended to claim the archive. The Romanov convoy arrived shortly after midnight. The harbor was silent except for the distant sound of water striking the concrete docks. Floodlights illuminated the abandoned facility, where several vehicles were already waiting. Clara stepped out of the armored car beside Damien. The cold wind carried the smell of steel and river water through the empty harbor. She knew this moment had been coming since the day she discovered the truth about the archive. But standing there now, facing the man who had engineered the entire conspiracy, made the reality feel far more dangerous. Inside the warehouse, Leonard Vance waited calmly. His appearance matched the image Clara had seen in the intelligence files. Tall, composed, and dressed like a man attending a corporate negotiation rather than a criminal confrontation. Several armed security agents stood nearby, their presence revealing that Vance had anticipated Damien's arrival. Vance smiled slightly when Clara and Damien entered the building. "Exactly as I expected," he said calmly. His voice carried the confidence of someone who believed the situation was already under control. He explained the truth without hesitation. The archive system had grown beyond anyone's ability to control years earlier. The secrets stored inside had become too valuable for powerful people to simply abandon. Vance believed the system should be centralized under one authority, his authority. With Clara Bennett's identity unlocking the archive, he could gain access to the financial records hidden inside. The leverage created by those secrets would allow him to control politicians, corporations, and criminal organizations across the world. It would make him untouchable. Clara felt a quiet anger rising inside her chest. Her father had died trying to prevent exactly that outcome. Vance had turned the archive into a weapon. Damien stood beside her, his posture tense but controlled. He understood what Vance was offering. If they allowed him to access the archive, the Romanov Empire could gain extraordinary influence over global financial networks. But that power would come at a cost. It would place Damien's entire organization under Vance's control. For the first time since Clara had met him, Damien faced a decision he could not solve through strategy alone. Power or loyalty. The choice hung silently between them. Vance stepped forward slightly, extending a small digital device toward Clara. "All you need to do," he said, "is activate the access sequence." The device contained the encrypted verification key her father had connected to her identity. Clara stared at it for several seconds. The decision she made in that moment would determine the future of the archive, the future of Damien's empire, and perhaps the future of several powerful people whose secrets remained hidden inside that system. She finally reached for the device. Damien watched her carefully. "Clara," he said quietly. The single word carried more emotion than anything he had said since the night of their wedding. He understood what she was about to do. Not unlock the archive. Destroy it. Clara activated the device. But instead of initiating the archive access protocol, she triggered the failsafe her father had hidden inside the system years earlier. The encrypted data began transmitting immediately. Every financial record, every secret agreement, every hidden transaction stored inside the archive, all of it released into secure investigative networks across multiple international agencies. The system collapsed instantly. The archive had lost its power the moment its secrets became public. Leonard Vance's calm expression shattered for the first time. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. But Clara did. She had ended the system her father died trying to expose. The criminal war surrounding the archive ended that night. Law enforcement agencies across several countries began investigating the financial records released from the system. Many of the powerful individuals connected to the archive disappeared from public view within days. Leonard Vance himself vanished before authorities could capture him, but his plan for controlling the archive had been destroyed. The Romanov Empire survived the chaos. Weeks later, the city of Chicago had returned to its uneasy balance of power. Inside the Romanov estate, Clara stood on the balcony overlooking the forest surrounding the property. The world she had entered as a powerless bride no longer existed. She had ended a war. She had destroyed a network capable of manipulating global power. And in the process, she had become someone far more dangerous than anyone expected. Damien Romanoff joined her quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Damien finally said something that surprised even himself. "Marrying you wasn't the end of a war." Clara looked at him. What was it? Damien's expression softened slightly. It was the beginning of something far more powerful. Clara turned back toward the forest. Soon she would leave the world of organized crime behind. But Damian Romanoff already understood something she had not yet realized. The woman he married to end a blood war might be the only person capable of building a new empire beside him.